my name is ZeBirdBrain, and today we are talking about compositing, but more specifically, blurs. And more specifically, the three main blurs that you use to blur out your elements. Radial blur, which shows as just blur in the node view, Gaussian blur, and blur box. And to show around these cool effects, I will be using Tiger. Tiger is a character from Bad at Being Good, which is the story I'm writing with friends. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can always visit my Discord server, and we have a channel just for that. Wink wink. Before we dive into these blurs individually, we have to understand what a blur is in its roots. So in very technical term, and I appreciate the help of my lovely dev friends at Toon Boom for explaining some of this to me. Any blur in technical term is what is considered a convolution. It's like passing a filter along an image, and for every pixel, that image is processed. So the real difference between all these blur types is the shape and the weight of that filter, the one that's used to process the image. For example, the box blur, when it does its thing, it's blurring the image with a box shape, hence why it's called the box blur. Another way to understand that shape aspect of a blur is also to use the bokeh blur. I have a full video about it, so you should check it out. But basically, the bokeh blur allows you to choose which shape you're using to blur your image. So like a disc, a star, a blade. Like I said, for this one, I do have a full video about it, so go check it out. For example, the blur box blurs things with a box shape, hence the name. And this is also why when you use it, you will notice that things are blurred with very straight line, kind of like a box, hence the name. Using a box means it's a bit faster to render usually than the radial blur and the Gaussian blur. This is because these two, instead of using a box, they use a circle shape. So that's why the blur is usually much more smoother than with the blur box. Also, don't forget to always be into render view when you look at blurs. So the radial blur uses a circle, and it falls off at the edge and everything, and the Gaussian blur also uses a circle filter shape, but the blending of that shape is different, which is why usually the Gaussian blur, when compared to the radial blur, has a little more foggy effect to it. It's kind of like creamier than the radial blur at the same radius. So they both have a radius of 3. Okay, so this is the brief introduction to these three nodes. So you have the box and the radial and the Gaussian blur that uses circles. And before we dive into these nodes individually, there's one thing I want to cover is that much like any of these effect nodes and stuff in Harmony, if you take a drawing layer and you approach it to the blurs, you have the option to use it as a mask. So that means you only get the blur effect where you drew. While this is available in all of these, if that's what you want to use it for, I recommend using the blur variable, because that's what it's made for, okay? But that being said, this is why all of these blurs always have the option to invert the matte. And oftentimes when we use them, we invert the matte, but then nothing happens. That's why nothing happens. It's because you didn't connect anything to it, okay? So it's the same for all these three blurs. I just wanted to get it off the way before I start. You're also gonna find something called the precision. This is a very technical thing. Like, I've never really had to change it in my career, so I'm not gonna cover it. So let's dive into this blur individually. First off is the blur box. According to the documentation, the blur box effect is a quick and easy way to create a blurring effect. The box blur changes the color values of each pixel based on the pixel next to it in a vertical and horizontal direction, which is basically what I was telling you. It blurs things using a box shape. In there, the most important things to understand is that you have the blurriness, which you can make directional or not. So directional is only going to blur it from certain directions, or you can blur it equally from both directions, like up and down. Of course, the higher the radius, the more blurry your things will be. If I put 0, I don't see anything. And if I put 10, I get it to be more blurry. Okay, I'm gonna leave it back to 3. Then you have the fall off. The fall off is the same for any node that you're gonna use. It's how much of a fall off you get from the side of your drawing to the end of the blur. So depending on if you choose 0 or 1, it's going to change how it looks. So I'm gonna show you right now. You see, if I put 1, the blurriness is gonna be very intense close by to the shape and then fall off very quickly into like non-blurry. If I put 0, it's gonna be way smoother all around. So if I get this little drawing to show you here by zooming on it, it's basically you take like where your where your drawing would end and where the blur would end, and depending on how much you blur it, and depending on the fall off, if you put a fall off of 0, it's going to be kind of more mellow to the direction, and if you put a fall off of 1, it's going to be very blurry here and fade off really quickly into the And that's it. There's also the option to do repeat edge pixel. I've never had to use it, but I've been told that sometimes when you blur, you can get some like darker artifact at the edge of your blurs, and that repeat edge pixel is gonna fix that. I've never had to do it, but that's what the legend says. Then you have the radial blur. According to the documentation, the blur radial effect creates an effect that softens, fogs, or obscures the image evenly in all directions. Hence, what I was saying before, that it uses a circle to do its blurring. It is more taxing on your computer than using a blur box because it uses a circle, but so does the Gaussian blur, okay? If you go to the properties of the radial blur, it's very easy. All you get to choose is the radius of your blur and the quality. Of course, a higher quality looks better, but it's higher in terms of processing time. So sometimes if you can set it to low and it makes your stuff faster, why not? And last but not least, you have the Gaussian blur. Like I was saying, the Gaussian blur also uses a circle, and you can make it directional if you want, just like the blur box. If you want to get just a horizontal blurriness, you can do so, and you can change the angle. And if you remove the directional, it's going to blur equally from all directions. Okay, so that being said, which one do you use and when? So this is a big question that I get all the time, and it's really up to interpretation for a lot of things. But typically, if you want to blur something, the box blur is used if you want to arbitrarily blur something quickly, and you're fine with the box shape. So usually it's great for items that are smaller, or if you're gonna use this as a in-between. Let's say I want to use a image as a mask in something like this Gaussian blur here, and I want to draw something and use this as my blur, and I don't like that this falls off too quickly. Sometimes you can use a box blur to blur that shape, just to get it a bit more faded out. You don't need something high quality, you just need something that does the job. So blur box, I really love it as like an intermediate blur for some effects, really cool. Or if something is small, like it's gonna be just fine. So I love the blur box if I want to save some processing time. But if I need to blur something that is in front of my background, like this tiger, or if I need to blur my background because it's further away, I would not typically use the blur box because it creates a very cheap looking effect when compared to the radial or the Gaussian blur. Okay? Then, radial blur. So the radial blur, you use it if you want a round blur, or if you want to blur something quickly and a less natural blurring is fine. And apparently this is great if you have something that is smaller, and if you render with something that has no GPU power. Because the last one on the list is the Gaussian blur. And the Gaussian blur, you're gonna use it if you want something very natural looking. It's a, general purpose blur. It's the one that you use for the most things because it's a good for everything blur. It's just a little more taxing in terms of rendering. But if you have a machine that has good GPU rendering, you should be very fine. And it's very great if you have a larger drawing or a larger element because it's going to look better and process it a bit better. So remember, box blur is great for something quick and easy to render. Radial blur is great for smaller images that you want to get a foggy look with. And Gaussian blur is usually your go-to for anything that you want to blur for like a camera movement or scene where you have a big layer to blur out. And I hope this was instructful. I will see you again next week for more videos. Bye!